Welcome to day 2 of the Energy Efficiency Forum. I hope everyone enjoyed yesterday's keynote speaker. Before we get started, I'm going to let you know that the QR code, which is on the little screen top, that will lead to our program of the day, which has all of the speaker bios, has the agenda, and even the speaker openness. And there will be having a meeting following during slide order. So everyone should bring tickets if you do not, and you can just go out to the table and every there. And make sure that we're networking with you're enjoying it, and make sure to congratulate all of our. I wanted to just thank all of our sponsors. So PNNL is our reception sponsor. We have community housing partners, PNNL, PRC, ICF, Optimum Building Solutions, our electric cooperative. Again, we couldn't put this on without all of their support. So if you see anyone who's any of our sponsors, please thank them as well. So I want to take a few minutes before I introduce this keynote to talk about VAEEC's work and where we're heading. I appreciate Dr. Goldberg's comments yesterday. Anyone who's speaking on the virtual day, where he talked about the redistricting as a factor which comes up. I've never heard that phrase before, but I thought it was really interesting how you described what's happening because of the non-partisan redistricting that has occurred. And it's really created so many requirements. About 1/3, if not more, have retired. And we're probably going to see even more. So that's why it makes the election so. And while we wanted to share that yesterday with all of you. But it does make it hard to just try to figure out what type of legislation an organization wants to work on in the General Assembly in 2024. You know, we have no clue who will be in control of either chamber. And even if we did know that, you don't know who some of the leadership will be. A lot of the leadership has changed over in both parties, in both chambers. So there's so many unknowns. It feels like we're walking into the Wild West. I want to now pivot to legal issues. I'm sure everyone has heard that Governor Youngkin has repealed Virginia's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI. And that 50% of our proceeds, of our state's proceeds, goes to low-income energy efficient housing through two different programs, which is a weatherization deferral repair program, which many weatherization providers are here today with us, can talk about the many benefits, what they're doing, the work that and the people that they serve. And then we also have, there's a new construction program that's ensuring that brand new low-income affordable housing is also energy efficient. So Southern Environmental Law Center filed a lawsuit claiming, stating that the regulatory repeal is unlawful. And so for those that don't know, Virginia Energy Efficiency Council, along with 2 other organizations, we will be filing what's called an amicus brief, or friend of the court, in support of that lawsuit. And we found out just yesterday, the schedule for the lawsuits. And so our amicus brief is due November 6th, and the trial will be November 13th. And that is in Fairfax District Court. So that's hot off the presses. We just found that out yesterday. And then finally, the last main update I wanted to provide was on our planning and preparation for the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law that passed Congress. BIL was actually 2 years ago. IRA was just last year. You will hear more about the workforce initiatives that VAEEC and many of our partners are undertaking on the panel. So I'll just provide a brief mention that we are also continue working with the State Energy Office, Department of Housing and Community Development, and the Department of Environmental Quality on other program initiatives such as the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, BIL weatherization money, and the home energy rebates. So we will continue to provide updates to you as we hear more. And if you are a VAEEC member and you'd like to collaborate with us in this work, please don't hesitate to reach out to me throughout the day. I'd love to connect with you, know what others, how you've been thinking about this. the type of outreach you've done to any of the state offices that I mentioned, or maybe others. And let's continue to have that conversation. That's something we would love to know what others in the state, what you're doing, who you've been talking to, and then just seeing if there's ways that we can collaborate. With that, I'm going to take a moment to honor a very important VAEEC member. So John Morrill with Fairfax County has been our board chair for the last 3 years. And unfortunately, because of term limit, his time on our board ends at the end of this year. John has been on our board for 9 years, first with Arlington County and now with Fairfax. And his leadership throughout 9 years, he has been steadfast and supportive leader that I know both the board and all of the staff have really appreciated. So please join me in taking a moment to thank John for his service. And he will still be around, will still be a member, just rolling off the board, but we just really appreciate all of his work and dedication to the organization for the last 9 years. Thank you. Now on to our keynote. Dr. Sawyer is the Director of the Electricity Infrastructure and Buildings Division at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratories. She's responsible for shaping and managing a vision and strategy to assure that PNNL addresses DOE's most important energy efficiency, clean energy, and electricity infrastructure challenges. Prior to joining PNNL, Dr. Sawyer served as Program Manager for Emerging Technologies and DOE's Building Technologies Office, where she developed and executed research and development strategies across the range of building technologies. She also worked collaboratively with national labs and external stakeholders to advance cross-cutting initiatives such as the Grid Interactive and Efficient Buildings, Advanced Building Construction, and Grid Modernization Initiatives. You can read more about Dr. Sawyer's background in our program, but now please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Hey, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Can you all hear me? Okay. So I decided to talk to you today about a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, my introduction, that I've spent the vast majority of my professional life working in the building sector. I care a lot about it. But what my bio doesn't include is that I've spent most of my actual real human being life working and just living in communities that are going through energy transition. So I've lived in the Rust Belt, deep ties to Appalachia. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about how what's happening right now in our world might look for some of those communities that have, when I've already seen that energy transition can be a really challenging thing to manage. We're under a lot more change now, though, than we had been in the years that I've been paying attention to this issue. We are really facing a grand challenge in figuring out how to develop a decarbonized energy system, a decarbonized economy, but do it in a way so that our energy system is resilient and equitable for all of these different communities that are just highly diverse, both throughout our nation and across the world. And there are a lot of different components to this now that are really new that we're currently living in. We are living through climate change. And just to mitigate that problem in and of itself will require massive shifts in the energy system, all the way from production through storage and use. And those same energy systems that are undergoing change are extremely vulnerable to the same extreme events caused by climate change, as well as new modes of operation, because the decarbonized energy solutions are variable. And we just don't have a way to manage our infrastructure to be able to meet that reality. So that is really quite a feedback loop, and you can lay on top of it the fact that both that energy transition and climate change itself have disproportionately impact marginalized groups. That is something the energy efficiency community is probably most savvy at thinking about relative to other groups in the energy world. but it's still something that's increasingly complex. So we're not new to this concept of electricity cost burden. We know that low-income energy users spend a higher percentage of their household income on electricity and on energy, and that looks very different in different communities. But it's a lot more complex than that. You really start looking at what you would need to do to ensure that our decarbonized energy system actually penetrates all of these different communities. So in the research community that's funded largely by the Department of Energy, we're spending a lot of time trying to research and look into exactly what this disproportionality looks like. And we've learned a lot of different pieces of this. I've learned that Black majority census tracts have installed 69% less rooftop solar PV than no majority tracts of the same household income level. And that since 2006, 90% of electric vehicle income credits were received by the top income quintile. And I've also learned that 10% of people with multiple disabilities have absolutely no access to paratransit. They live in paratransit deserts. And these are just little snippets of what this research starts to show you. What is very clear when you start digging into this, and there is just a foundational gap in knowledge in understanding the complexity of how energy and electricity impacts people's lived environments. And these different impacts can compound over time. They're cumulative. People's identities and communities intersect in all of these different ways. And if we don't understand all of these things in this massively changing world, we can really miss some opportunities to do a lot of good for energy transition. So the concept that I am talking to you about is energy equity, which recognizes that these disadvantaged communities have been historically marginalized and overburdened by pollution, underinvestment, and simply lack of access to energy efficient technologies. And an equitable energy efficient economy is one in which participation in that economy is the benefits of it, whether they are economic, whether they are social, whether they are health, will impact all people regardless of their socioeconomic status, their ability, their race, or any other type of variable that might be important. But that will not happen accidentally, and we're not going to fall backwards into an equitable decarbonized system. Achieving energy equity requires that we are very intentional about designing systems and technologies and practices that will lead to that fair and just distribution of benefits. So you probably heard about this early in this administration when this concept of energy equity started to be talked about a lot more. Right around that same time, there was this rollout of a really structured approach to how we would decarbonize our economy by 2050. It was called the American Solomon Principle. And there were these three pillars. And these three pillars have since been turned into the legislation that we just heard about through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. It doesn't map to it exactly, but this is the philosophy that underlies those decisions. So first, you accelerate towards a clean energy economy. Second, you decarbonize your end uses in transportation and buildings and in industry through energy efficiency and electrification, and you enhance your ecosystem. So this sounds really very straightforward on paper, but it, as you all know, gets very, very complicated in implementation. So given that, I'm really only going to focus on the central part of this, that pillar number 2. But the primary reason for that is I think there's a huge opportunity, particularly in the built environment. So in 2022 was the second year in a row the U.S. greenhouse gas emissions rose by about 1.3%. But if you actually look into that data in the power sector, the emissions are going down. They're displacing coal and natural gas with variable renewables. There are challenges with that, but it is what's happening. But in the building sector, that is the area where emissions are increasing the most, and they're increasing the most because of heating. And so there's a lot to kind of be dug into in the building sector. It's more complex and it's larger than people realize in terms of a decarbonization opportunity. Buildings account for 75% of the electricity used in the U.S. and about 35% of our CO2 emissions. The sector also represents, in terms of primary energy, the largest single slice. Nobody ever believes to me unless they actually work in buildings. It is larger than transportation. The emissions of buildings are critically important. But if you look at that primary energy use, about 55% of it comes from electricity and the other 45% comes from combustion. And that combustion piece of it is something that's gotten a lot more attention recently. And I wanted to kind of dig into those applications a bit more because, again, there's a huge opportunity here that gets very complicated when you start to actually apply it to individual communities. So one of the things that's gotten a lot of attention since the COVID-19 pandemic is the indoor air quality challenges within buildings. Americans spend 90% of their time indoors. Vulnerable populations, those that are elderly, that are young, people with disabilities, they spend even more than that indoors. And in some cases, there are pollutants indoors that can be 2 to 5 times higher than in outdoor concentrations. And combustion just doesn't help that situation. Combustion produces gases and particulate matter that can exacerbate health conditions, particularly asthma, or it can at least, or it can worsen the incidence rate of it. What's more challenging than that is when health professionals, and I'm not a health professional, looks into this data, you see that Black and Puerto Rican children in particular have much higher annual average death rates per million than other socioeconomic groups when scientists normalize for all other variables. So again, we've been living through this COVID pandemic on top of everything else. These type of statistics, when we understand that our indoor environment can impact our health outcomes in a significant way in a way we haven't realized before, started to get a lot of press. You lay on top of that decarbonization needs, the fact that buildings are important. We start to see that heat pumps are having a moment. Heat pumps are very, very exciting now. I've worked in this space for a long time. I literally never thought that I would see someone dressed up like a heat pump walking through the White House. But that is what has happened this year. And it is there. My parents talked to me about heat pumps this year. Like I still can't wrap my mind around. There is so much excitement. And it's not unprecedented. It's actually showing itself in the marketplace. Right? In 2022, heat pump sales actually surpassed gas furnaces for the very first time. Something is happening here. And there's a reason from a decarbonization perspective at a national, global level to be very excited about. Because there have been studies that have shown if you deploy residential heat pumps starting in 2022 for 15 years out, you have the opportunity to reduce the 20-year global warming potential by 53 to 67%. That's including marginal emissions from the source all the way to use. And obviously that range is about the fact that we have a very diverse country with lots of different climates and use cases, but it's still a big impact. And the IEA is showing very similar statistics where 90% of global space and water heating can be matched with lower CO2 emissions if you use today's air source heat pump, today's technology. So again, lots of excitement. And I think that's a good thing. I really do think that's a good thing. But again, it gets more complicated when you actually have your boots on the ground and you're trying to see the impacts that this will have in communities. So I want to take you far from Virginia to Cordova, Alaska, because I think it's a great use case and an example of a project, a research project that my colleague Sam Rosenberg is leading in that space. So you see this beautiful picture of Cordova, and you're also looking at the economic engine of that community, which is a commercial fishery. Cordova is an isolated community with a member-owned mine. No transmission connection to any other community. Heating is provided by heating oil and has been for decades. So the utility there has a goal to decarbonize. The obvious technology to do such a thing in Alaska is cold climate heat pumps. But that will add a lot of load to the grid and will put at risk commercial fishery. So what we're trying to figure out is how can we use load shifting, affordable load shifting technologies to both provide people with a comfortable, safe indoor environment and a job at a local commercial fishery. And that research is underway. We love working with the people in Cordova, but those are the types of questions that look drastically different in different communities all over the country that we need to start grappling with. We're going to actually do this effectively. Because while I'm very excited about the opportunity to improve people's health and to decarbonize the environment through heat pumps, I do worry about the impact that they'll have on the grid. Sweat energy efficiency has to be partnered up with electrification. I'm also worried that we're going to assume affordability when it's not necessary that any given technology, you just plop it in someone's building, is going to lead to an affordable outcome. If you don't think about the heat pump as a part of a larger building package, it's just complicated. And I think we need to think about this entire thing within the four walls of our building. That is one system, and then with a larger system as well. So that takes me to the importance of grid planning, where those of us that have spent our careers working on energy efficiency and looking at these decarbonization challenges also start partnering with people that understand a broader energy system. So some of my colleagues at the lab, led by Bethel Terkegi, have been trying to understand the new emerging objective of equity in distribution grid planning. So traditionally, the variables that those of us who care about grid planning have been focused on have been reliability and cost. And those have served us very well. They've led to a really robust and reliable energy system. Increasingly, people are thinking about decarbonization, they're thinking about resilience, and Bethel and her team are now laying equity on top of it as well. How do we understand what is a disadvantaged community and versus not when you're looking at energy infrastructure versus other variables? And how do you understand the trade-offs between all of these different objectives that all are important, will all impact people's lives, but it's probably not realistic to be able to get them all to the best possible state. We have to understand these trade-offs. So I'm going to go through a very quick snapshot of some of the research that Bethel and her team has done. It's actually focused on electric vehicles, but it could very easily be. They just want to focus on electric vehicles. Heat pumps are a large load, just like an electric vehicle is. Just like electric vehicles, the implementation and the deployment of heat pumps in disadvantaged communities look different than we see in non-disadvantaged communities. But in the case of electric vehicles, the adoption in non-disadvantaged communities is about 20% higher than in disadvantaged communities. And the load growth looks different between these communities as well. This obviously is agnostic of whether we're talking about electric vehicles or heat pumps. But the non-disadvantaged communities have a higher baseload, and their baseload is projected to increase more quickly over time because of things like electric vehicles, heat pumps being deployed more quickly in those communities. So we have to think about what does that actually mean for infrastructure upgrades in those different communities. So what I'm showing you here is a feeder. This is a picture of a generic feeder in the year 2024. You see a substation at the bottom and two disadvantaged communities, the DAC 1 and DAC 2. Now this is done for illustrative purposes only. These disadvantaged communities were defined based on your distance from the substation and based on the infrastructure within that community. There's a lot of research and discussion going around about how to define a disadvantaged community. This was for the purpose of doing an analysis that could show what we might do with an objective like equity in grid planning. So we have two examples. One is our business as usual case, where the graphs I showed you about the increase in our baseload, that growth rate, and the deployment of electric vehicles do not change. It's just as that gap you saw between the red and black lines is the same as it's always been, and it will go that way forward into the year 2030. In our equitable example, the gap closes. So you get the same deployment of electric vehicles in all of the communities on this feeder, and the growth rate fits. So the question is, how would the infrastructure upgrade on this feeder look between those two different examples? Well, in the year 2026, if we stuck with the business as usual, you would only see upgrades where those red dots are. So the only upgrades are in non-disadvantaged communities. But if you tried to lower that gap, you had just as many electric vehicles deployed, and the growth rates matched between the two communities, you would start to get asset upgrades in a disadvantaged. And that same trend continues in 2028 and 2020. Now, again, this is a simple analysis. We just did this based on thermodynamics. So we did a power flow analysis through this feeder, this generic feeder. If we define the disadvantaged communities in different ways, you would get a different outcome. But again, it's illustrative to show the type of thinking you would need to do to apply this into a feeder of this type. And the importance, people thinking about deploying technologies and working with the people that understand things like infrastructure for us to be able to work in partnership together here. So there's a lot of opportunities here to think about these different objectives in grid planning. There are a lot of the same types of objectives we think about within buildings as well. So I'd encourage people to think about, again, the trade-offs here, the opportunities to ask questions differently than we've done in the past, and how that might impact communities that maybe have been not at the table as much as they have been, should have been throughout the last kind of waves of change. So I'm just going to leave you with saying, I am excited about building electrification. It provides an opportunity to mitigate climate change, and it can improve energy access and health outcomes for a lot of different communities. It's absolutely not the only solution. There are a lot of non-electrification solutions that might be the right ones for individual communities. But a positive impacts from electrification, energy efficiency, and any other technology or policy effort will only reach these underserved communities if we work in partnership with them and perform some sort of more aware analysis around grid planning, operation, as well as technologies. And it's up to us and engineers and policymakers to really address those unique community goals, because again, it will not happen accidentally. that is all I have for you. I hope that this can help you launch into a bunch of robust discussions for the last couple of days. And if you are ever interested in working with PNNL, I'm happy to be a part of it. Do we take questions? So, yeah.
If anyone has a question, just raise your hand. We do have microphones we can pass around. We have about probably time, I'd say, for 2 questions. John asks.
Thank you very much for that very interesting, thought-provoking presentation. It was very neat that you had that community that had its own locally owned microgrid as a test case. To what extent are you publishing this work in a manner that, you know, the kind of the lessons learned from this could be, and any considerations applied to a more commercial grid situation where there are even additional motivations in play?
Yeah, I think that's something that, so for that individual project, it's still underway. So we kind of aren't at the stage to be able to do that. But there are a lot of these different demonstration projects, communities that are really being launched now or have just been launched in the last year. And we're actually in the process of having those types of conversations with our sponsors at the Department of Energy. Because I will say we've not been great at that in the past. We do a lot of demonstrations, but we don't think about how to actually scale those results better in a way that is going to be more impactful. So I'm guessing a technical report in a journal publication is not going to do it, which has been that has been the way that we have operated in the past. And so I think actually that'd be a great opportunity for feedback if you haven't. So think about the best way to do these types of things. We're trying to figure out how to scale the fact that we have 17 national labs and like 10,000 or 30,000 communities or something that we have to engage in. So I'm open to suggestions there, but we do understand the need, and we're just trying to figure out the best way to do it. My guess is there's be some trial and error involved. So sorry, maybe not the most satisfying answer.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Dave Young, VAEEC. It's great to see you also talking about across sectors, building sector, vehicle sector, all that's brought together. I'm also thinking, are you all looking at not just residential EV activity, but also fleet EV activity and how that might affect things, particularly say in multifamily building areas, things like that? You may have fleets that are located near rather significant building loads too. And if the fleets start having megawatt level charging, the whole system has to have significant improvements.
Yeah, we actually have a demonstration project. There's a program called Connected Communities, also funded by the Department of Energy, that we're involved in 2 of the projects there. One of them is at Salt Lake City, which is a utility-owned project that includes a mass transit center as well as an electrified fleet that we're trying to work into both, you know, existing multi-use buildings and residential commercial buildings, and trying to figure out how we get large, something like 9 megawatt projects to get a use case where we can include all of these different things. So again, unfortunately, these projects are slower than I would like them to be to figure out. But it is, I mean, I did not live less than 3 years ago, and I can tell you that when I was there, being able to integrate those types of loads was unheard of, and we are seeing more and more. Fleets, I think, have been identified as a huge opportunity. The challenge is to figure out exactly how to get the right types of demonstrations, again, to be scalable. What are the business models? Because they're kind of, they have historically. So still good research to be done, hopefully research that we can get done quickly. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. We really appreciate it. Well, I know it feels like we just got started, but we are going to have a break. So there are beverages out in the main hallway. You have an opportunity to chat with Dr. Sawyer or chat amongst yourselves. We just ask you to return back to the main room at 2:10 for our workforce development panel at 2:15. Thank you. Yes. Yes.